Hi. Could South America be the best option in case of war? I would definitely think so. It's the title of the video. I've lived in South America for a good chunk of my life. It's definitely the place I've lived in the longest out of all other continents, all other countries, and all combined. At least as of now, I'm 24 now. I've lived in a bunch of different countries in North America, in Europe, in Australia, where I am right now. But yeah, South America is a really interesting place because I think if you're a typical Westerner, if you're European, if you're American, you don't consider Latin America or South America as part of the West. Uh, but I've always thought that it clearly was. And to me, it's pretty obvious because, well, it's mostly Christian. It's even more Christian, actually, than most of Europe and the US now. It was colonized by European countries like Australia, like Canada, like the US, and it's got like a lot. It had a lot of European immigration. So a lot of people think of Latin Americans as mostly some sort of like native Indian, native tribes, etc. But in reality, like the average Latin America or South American, or especially the average Brazilian, Argentinian, Chilean, Uruguayan, uh, you're mostly going to see people with Italian descent, with German descent, with Spanish descent, with Portuguese descent, with Polish descent, with yeah, just pretty much Central, Western, and even Eastern Europe as well. So I definitely consider South America in a way as an extension of the West, a third/fourth route where it's the new world. It's not developed like the U.S. or Canada or Australia or New Zealand, but it's there and it's got a lot of similarities. Obviously, it's much easier to live in South America and keep in contact with people from North America, from Europe, because it's only a few hours east of like North America and a few hours west of Europe, obviously. So, like in terms of time zones, it might be 3, 4 hours from London, depending on where you are, and it might be 1 hour, 2 hours from New York, and 4 hours from LA. I don't mean flight. I mean like time change, and even flights, depending on where you are in South America. If you're in Colombia, for example, you're pretty close to Florida, to California, and you're not that far away from Europe. You could get pretty much anywhere in the U.S., in Canada, and in Europe through a direct flight. If you're in a good airport hub like Panama, like São Paulo, etc. So it's definitely, in my opinion, a part of the West, a part of Western culture. You're going to see a lot of Christian values pretty much everywhere you go there. Obviously, a lot of the changes that are happening in the West are also happening in South America. So with like more progressive causes and all that, with some of the polarization that's been happening, especially in the U.S., it also happens in big countries like Brazil, like Argentina. So it's a very interesting part of the world, but there's some factors that make it very much different from the West in the sense of isolation. And I know when most people think of isolation, they mostly think, at least in the Western context, they think of New Zealand, they think of Australia. I think especially New Zealand. I mean, it's an island in the middle of the Pacific. If you take like the point on Earth that is most surrounded by water, that has like the hemisphere on Earth that has the most amount of water, New Zealand will be exactly in the center of it. So it really is like on the opposite side of most places in the world. But New Zealand happens to be actually quite close to Asia on relative terms. Like obviously you have many direct flights to Southeast Asia, to China, to Japan, I think as well, also to America. But it's much closer on the west side of the Pacific than on the eastern side of the Pacific. And to me, Australia and New Zealand end up being very influenced by some more important geopolitical tensions that happen, obviously, in Southeast Asia and Singapore and China and Taiwan. Those tensions, they actually affect Australia and New Zealand a bit more, just like the tensions in the Middle East affect Europe a bit more. North America is pretty isolated, but well, it's the US, so you can't really be isolated if you're the US. And that kind of leaves South America. I'm going to put a map here right now. It's about missile range of like most nuclear powers, and you're going to notice that except for the 5 countries that can pretty much shoot missiles anywhere in the world, all the other relevant countries, they can also shoot a lot of missiles like most of the planet, throughout most of the planet, but one exception is actually South America, and South America is almost exactly protected. It's almost as if God said it was a no-go zone for missiles, and it's a very interesting approach. Obviously, if you think that for some reason the U.S. would attack South America or Europe or Western Africa, like that is very unrealistic. If you thought that, then maybe you wouldn't be that safe. But realistically, the last war that happened in South America was actually 160 years ago, the war in Paraguay, which was Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil against Paraguay. Pretty much, it was a pretty swift war, violent as well, but like it ended up pretty quickly. And from then on, there's been literally no wars in South America. Some of the countries in South America are quite like Pacific in a way. Um, Uruguay, obviously, Argentina, Chile, Brazil. They're very neutral. Brazil's part of BRICS, but it's also considered a U.S. non-NATO ally. So it's in bad with Russia and China, but it's also kind of in bad with the U.S. Most South American countries, they have pretty good visa-free travel. Obviously, being colonized by Portugal and Spain, they have closer relations with Europe. So if you're Argentinian, if you're from Brazil, if you're Chilean, you can most likely travel to Europe without a visa, to the UK without a visa, and in the case of Chile, you can even travel to the US without a visa. Some pretty good passports. Not the best economies, but definitely not the worst economies. I mean, in terms of absolute poverty and just like low levels of income, you're definitely going to find much worse countries in Africa, in many parts of Asia. So South America kind of hangs in there at that kind of middle income, which obviously is a little higher if you go south. If you go Uruguay, Argentina, South Brazil, Chile, it's a little better off. If you're in like Bolivia or let's say Venezuela, for example, obviously it's a little more rough. But it's a very interesting continent. Some very good opportunities overall. So easy to integrate. Like if you go to South America and you like soccer, it's a given. There you go. You're integrated. I've talked about it before in my video about Brazil. You go to Brazil, you're there for 2 minutes, and regardless of where you're from, you fall in love. And despite the violence and despite the poverty and despite the danger and despite being very politically polarized, people just fit in a way. People just kind of like hang in there in a way that like there's so many French people in Brazil, Americans in Brazil that leave their countries despite having to endure like lower salaries or being far away from everything or far away from family, and they kind of settle in Brazil and they just fit in and they're really accepted. I've hardly seen any culture that's more accepting and more than just accept, they kind of look up to foreigners in a way, as South Americans do. So it's definitely a very interesting concept, a very interesting add-on to your diversification portfolio. And if you're looking for a more neutral consideration, if you're looking at more like, okay, I want to settle down, I've got my money, I can bring my money with me, I've got my income, I can bring my income with me, might be one of the best places in the world. If you're in north east Brazil, like Recife, for example, you're a few hours flight from Europe, you're a few hours flight from the US. You're right in the equator. The weather is pretty much all the same. It's just wet season and dry season. Really beautiful beaches. I've been, and just gorgeous beaches in northeast Brazil. There's no way to describe it otherwise. Uh, Definitely a lower cost of living than pretty much anywhere in Europe. Maybe Albania would compare. Turkey is probably a little cheaper actually. Uh, much cheaper than anywhere in North America and quite possibly in Central America as well. So definitely a region in the world to consider, to diversify, to maybe get a second passport, to move, to just chill. And I'm not particularly scared about a world war. I mean, I'm shooting this video in 2025. Maybe you're gonna be watching it in 27 and be laughing at me, but I don't know. Like I don't think anything will happen. But as a backup, it's a good place to be. Let's call it that. It's a good place to be for a backup. I think probably the two best countries in that sense, or three, would be Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile, because they're just so far south. Like if you see direct flights from Buenos Aires or from Santiago, for example, it's too far. You can't get direct. Like I think Santiago is one of the few cities in the world that doesn't have a direct flight to Dubai. Melbourne has a direct flight to Dubai. LA has it. I think Vancouver probably has it. Tokyo has it, but Santiago doesn't because it's just that far, you know. And so it's an interesting option. Nature is absolutely gorgeous. Back in 2015, me and my family went to Santiago. We stayed there a couple of days, and then we rented a car and went west through the mountains and into Viña de Mar. And honestly, it reminds me of like northern Italy and Switzerland because the mountains are gorgeous. It's very Mediterranean, great weather. It was summer, but it wasn't like stupidly hot or anything. Obviously, you go north, you got the Atacama. You go south, you got Patagonia. So what else do you fucking need, you know? But yeah, I hope you guys liked the video. Comment below if you want to know anything more about South America. I've only been to like 4 South American countries, so as of right now, it's a little bit limited, but I hope to expand that knowledge soon. But I'll see you guys around.